The subdivision was supposed to be a dream. Perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, and streets so quiet that you could hear sprinklers clicking in the early morning. But for me, that dream was shattered almost as soon as I moved in. My old but dependable pickup truck became the target of constant scrutiny from the HOA. They claimed it was an eyesore, unfit for the aesthetic standards of the community. At first, the letters came weekly, neatly folded notices tucked into envelopes, written in the kind of corporate tone that managed to sound polite and threatening at the same time. Then came the fines. Small at first, $50, then $100, then $250. They stacked up like bricks, designed to break someone into compliance. But I refused to bow. That truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was a piece of my livelihood, my freedom, and a reminder of everything I had worked for. The harassment escalated. I noticed board members walking past my driveway with their phones out, snapping pictures from different angles as if they were documenting evidence for a trial. Neighbors I had never spoken to suddenly seemed to have opinions about community values and visual harmony. Some avoided eye contact altogether, afraid to be seen talking to the troublemaker. Others smirked behind their manicured hedges, enjoying the spectacle of someone else being singled out. It was around the third month that I realized the HOA didn't just dislike my truck. They wanted me gone. They were trying to make life unbearable until I sold the house and left. But they underestimated me. I wasn't going anywhere. The idea started as a joke. One night, after another notice had been slipped under my door, I sat staring at the truck in the driveway. What if, I thought, instead of hiding it, I made it impossible to ignore? What if I turned their obsession into a spectacle? That night, a seed of rebellion planted itself in my mind, and over the following days, it grew into something bigger, something wild, something that would make sure they never forgot me. I began researching, quietly and methodically. Engineering blogs, construction forums, even old YouTube videos of bizarre projects people had pulled off in their backyards. The pieces started falling into place. I wouldn't just fight the HOA with paperwork or lawyers. I would fight them with creativity and sheer audacity. The preparation took weeks. I ordered materials discreetly, spreading purchases across multiple hardware stores so nothing looked suspicious. Late at night, I drew sketches under the glow of a desk lamp, refining and revising, making sure every measurement was perfect. The project demanded secrecy, so I pretended to comply during the day. I moved the truck into the garage sometimes, left the driveway empty, even gave a polite wave to the nosy board members. They thought they had finally broken me. But behind the scenes, something legendary was brewing. Then came the night of execution. Under cover of darkness, with a small team of trusted friends, the work began. The whir of tools echoed softly, muffled by thick tarps. Hours stretched into the early morning, sweat mixing with determination as the plan came alive. Piece by piece, structure by structure, it all started to take shape. When the sun finally rose, the neighborhood awoke to something none of them could have imagined. My truck, my hated, fined, photographed, despised pickup, was no longer in the driveway. It was perched proudly on the roof of my house, secured with a custom platform and reinforced beams that made it look like it belonged there. The sight was absurd, defiant, and glorious. From every angle, from every street, from every backyard, there it was, a monument to stubbornness, a beacon of resistance, a declaration that I wasn't going to be pushed around by a group of clipboard-wielding neighbors with superiority complexes. By mid-morning, the street was packed. Neighbors stood in. HOA wanted control, but the story had grown beyond them. It was no longer about one man and his truck. It had become a symbol of resistance against petty authority everywhere. Of course, symbols don't pay bills, and the fines kept piling up. I ignored them, stacking unopened envelopes in a drawer. The HOA thought money would scare me, but they still didn't understand. They could slap numbers on paper all they wanted. Numbers meant nothing to me compared to the satisfaction of standing my ground. Still, the HOA wasn't stupid. They shifted strategies. Instead of just targeting me, they began targeting the people around me. Friends who visited my house got letters warning them about unauthorized parking. Neighbors who expressed support found their lawns scrutinized for weeds or minor infractions. It was classic intimidation, an attempt to isolate me by making others too afraid to associate. The tension boiled over at the emergency HOA meeting. I didn't attend, but word traveled fast. The board president stormed into the gathering with a slideshow of my house projected on a big screen. He ranted about safety codes, insurance risks, and the sanctity of neighborhood standards. He warned that if they didn't crush my rebellion quickly, others might start following my example. He painted me as a dangerous influence, a rebel threatening to unravel the fabric of the community. What he didn't realize was that every attempt to paint me as a villain only added fuel to my story. By trying to silence me, they were making me louder. By trying to erase me, they were carving me deeper into the public eye. But behind the scenes, the HOA was escalating. A letter arrived not long after the meeting, this time not just threatening fines, but demanding structural inspection access. They claimed they needed to ensure my roof could safely support the weight of the truck. I recognized the movie. Instantly, they were looking for an excuse to enter my home, snoop around, and find anything they could use against me. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the truck anymore. This was about control. The HOA wanted to break me, not just for my defiance, but as an example to everyone else. If I won, it meant they could lose. And for people like them, losing was unthinkable. I spent sleepless nights thinking about what would come next. Legal battles, possible liens on my property, even threats to seize the house. They had resources, lawyers, and a system tilted in their favor. But I had something they didn't: public opinion. And I intended to use it. So while they plotted behind closed doors, I began my own preparations. I started documenting everything, every letter, every fine, every suspicious photo taken of my property. I created a file so thick it looked like a novel. If they wanted a war, I would fight them not just with defiance, but with evidence. And as the 10th day approached, the deadline they had given me to remove the truck, I made a decision. I wasn't going to back down. If anything, I was going to push harder. The HOA had declared war, and I wasn't going to just play defense. The night before the deadline, I stood in my driveway, staring up at the truck silhouetted against the moonlight. It looked almost mythical up there, like a guardian watching over me. It wasn't just a vehicle anymore. It was a statement carved into steel and concrete. The HOA thought they could intimidate me into compliance, but they had no idea what I was about to unleash, because if they wanted escalation, I was more than ready to give it to them. And the very next morning, before the board could even begin celebrating their deadline, I had already set the next phase of my plan in motion. The 10th day arrived with the kind of tension you could feel in the air. The HOA had circled it on their calendars, counting down the hours until they could celebrate their victory. They believed I would crumble, that the pressure of legal threats, fines, and community shame would finally force me to cave. But when dawn broke over the neighborhood, the truck was still there, sitting proudly on my roof like a middle finger carved in steel. That morning, the HOA board president marched down the street in his pressed khakis and crisp polo, flanked by 2 other board members. Their clipboards were tucked under their arms like weapons. I watched from the window as they stood at the end of my driveway, staring at the truck in disbelief. They hadn't won. Their plan had failed. But what they didn't realize was that I had been planning something far bigger than just defying their deadline. While they had been sharpening their legal claws, I had been preparing my counterattack. For weeks I had collected every scrap of evidence, every letter, every photograph, and every fine. But evidence wasn't enough on its own. I needed an audience. I needed the court of public opinion. And thanks to the truck stunt, I already had one. That morning, just hours before the HOA came snooping, I uploaded a video. It wasn't flashy, just a simple recording of me explaining everything, how the HOA had harassed me for months, how they had targeted my neighbors for supporting me, how they had piled fines on top of fines in their crusade against one pickup truck. I showed the letters, the threats, the intimidation tactics. And of course, I ended with footage of the truck on the roof, gleaming in the sunlight like a symbol of defiance. Within hours, the video exploded. Comments poured in by the thousands. People shared their own HOA horror stories, calling the board bullies, tyrants, control freaks. Strangers from across the country rallied behind me, some even offering legal advice or to contribute to a defense fund. The narrative shifted completely. I wasn't just a guy with a truck anymore. I was the underdog taken. GA, stand against a broken system. By noon, reporters were back on my street, shoving microphones at anyone willing to talk. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now voiced their frustrations. The story had grown into something much bigger than my subdivision. It was a national conversation about power, property rights, and how far HOAs would go to enforce control. The HOA, meanwhile, scrambled. The board president tried to give a statement to the press, but his carefully rehearsed talking points fell apart under the weight of public outrage. No matter how many times he said, safety hazard or community standards, the cameras captured what he really looked like. A man desperate to defend his crumbling authority. But the board wasn't about to give up. Later that evening, I received a certified letter by courier. This time, it was no mere warning. It was a formal notice of intent to pursue legal action. They accused me of creating a public nuisance, endangering the neighborhood, and deliberately inciting unrest. I knew the legal fight was coming, but instead of shrinking back, I leaned forward. I contacted a lawyer recommended by one of the countless supporters who had reached out online. She specialized in cases exactly like mine, cases where HOAs overstepped, where they treated homeowners as subjects instead of equals. And when I showed her the mountain of evidence I had collected, she smiled in a way that told me I wasn't just fighting a battle. I had a real chance of winning the war. The days that followed were chaos. News vans clogged the street. Neighbors complained about traffic but couldn't resist sneaking glances at the circus unfolding on their doorstep. The HOA doubled down on its threats, issuing even steeper fines and trying to call emergency votes to ban rooftop displays of any kind. It was laughable. They were trying to write new rules to fix a problem they had created. But the harder they pushed, the more they looked like fools. Online, the story was evolving into a saga. Commentators broke down every new development. Memes flooded social media. Late-night hosts joked about the man who parked his truck on his roof just to spite his HOA. Even my lawyer said I had something rare on my side: momentum. Still, I wasn't naive. Public opinion was powerful, but the HOA had money and lawyers who would drag me into court the first chance they got. And when that happened, I couldn't just rely on viral fame. I needed to prove, beyond any doubt, that I had broken no laws, endangered no one, and stood firmly within my rights as a homeowner. So while the board plotted its next move, I doubled down on preparation. I brought in my own structural engineer to inspect the roof, to document that the platform holding the truck was not only safe but reinforced beyond standard building codes. I had photographs, measurements, and official reports ready to counter any claims of imminent danger. The HOA wanted to drag me into court. Fine. I would walk in with a mountain of proof and the backing of thousands of strangers cheering me on from their living rooms. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about winning a case. It was about sending a message. The HOA had made an example out of me, but in the end, I would be the one making an example out of them. As the week ended, the letter arrived with the date of the first court hearing. My lawyer highlighted it on the calendar, telling me to be ready. I looked at the date, then looked back at the truck shining on the roof. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a spectacle. And in a spectacle, the one who controls the story controls everything. The HOA thought the law was on their side, but they had no idea just how far I was willing to go to make sure the world saw them for what they really were. And the courtroom was going to be the stage for my next move. The day of the first hearing dawned gray and heavy, the kind of morning that seemed to carry weight all on its own. The neighborhood had been buzzing about it for days. Some whispered that this was when the HOA would finally crush me, while others quietly admitted they were rooting for me, even if they didn't dare say it out loud near the board members. When I pulled up to the courthouse, the scene looked more like the arrival of a celebrity trial than a simple HOA dispute. Camera crews lined the steps, reporters jostling for position. Signs bobbed in the crowd, some declaring, "Down with HOAs," while others bore crude sketches of trucks perched on rooftops. The spectacle had grown larger than anyone expected, and as I stepped out of my car, microphones and questions flew at me from every direction. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. On one side sat the HOA board, stiff and polished, their lawyer in a tailored suit with stacks of binders spread across the table like weapons. On my side sat my attorney, calm and collected, with a thinner folder, but one packed with sharp, undeniable evidence. Behind us, the gallery overflowed with curious spectators, journalists, and even a few neighbors who wanted to see history in the making. The judge entered, stern and no-nonsense, immediately demanding order. This wasn't going to be a carnival, she warned. This was a court of law. But even her presence couldn't drain the tension that hung thick in the air. The HOA's lawyer went first. He spoke with the smoothness of someone who had done this hundreds of times, painting a picture of me as reckless, disruptive, and dangerous. He described the truck on the roof as a catastrophic accident waiting to happen, claiming it endangered not just my home, but every neighbor nearby. He argued that property values had already dipped, that families were considering moving, that I had turned a peaceful subdivision into a media circus. He spoke of responsibility, standards, and protecting the community. It was a performance, carefully crafted to make me look like a menace rather than a homeowner standing up for myself. And for a moment, I could see some heads in the gallery nodding, buying into the narrative. But then it was our turn. My lawyer stood, calm but firm, and began dismantling the HOA's case piece by piece. She produced the structural engineer's report, showing that the roof platform had been reinforced far beyond safety requirements. She held up photographs of the beams, the anchoring systems, the precise measurements. What the HOA had called reckless, she reframed as meticulous and responsible. Then came the letters, the endless stream of fines, threats, and harassment I had endured. One by one, she laid them before the judge, painting a picture of an HOA not acting out of concern for safety, but out of spite, ego, and control. Each letter was read into the record, each fine highlighted, until the courtroom could see clearly just how far the board had gone to break me. And finally, she played the video, the one I had released online, the one that had gone viral. Clips of my story filled the screen, showing the harassment, the intimidation, and the resilience that had led to the truck on the roof. The gallery leaned forward, captivated. The judge watched silently, expression unreadable, but her eyes didn't leave the screen. When the video ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. The HOA's lawyer sputtered, trying to regain control, but the damage was done. The narrative had shifted. I wasn't the reckless homeowner they wanted me to be. I was the victim of an HOA that had lost its way, an HOA that cared more about control than community. The judge didn't make an immediate ruling. Instead, she scheduled a continuation, ordering both sides to provide additional evidence. But as we left the courthouse, the momentum was clearly on my side. Reporters swarmed, eager to capture the shift in the story. Online, clips from the hearing spray, ad just as fast as the original truck stunt had. The HOA had wanted a private punishment, but now their tactics were being aired publicly for the world to see. Back in the neighborhood, the atmosphere was different. Neighbors who had once avoided me now gave small nods of encouragement. Some even whispered their own frustrations with the board, frustrations they had been too afraid to voice before. The board, meanwhile, seemed rattled. Their president no longer strutted down the street. Instead, he hurried past with eyes fixed on the ground, muttering into his phone. But the battle was far from over. The HOA wasn't going to walk away quietly. They still had lawyers, money, and a deep desire to save face. And I knew they would try to twist the story again, to find some angle, some technicality, some loophole they could exploit. That night, as I stood on my porch staring at the truck illuminated by the streetlight, I realized something important. The courtroom wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about exposing the truth, about dragging the HOA's behavior into the light where everyone could see it. The board had declared war. The courtroom had become the battlefield. And while they had their binders and lawyers, I had something they couldn't take away: public support and the will to fight back, no matter how long it took. The next hearing was weeks away, but I knew the HOA wouldn't sit idle until then. They would scheme, they would lash out, and they would try every trick in the book to claw back control. And when they did, I would be ready. Because this wasn't just my fight anymore. This had become bigger than me, bigger than one truck, bigger than one subdivision. This had become a fight against every petty tyrant hiding behind the title of Homeowners Association. The HOA thought the courtroom would break me. Instead, it had only made me stronger. And the next move, I knew, would push this battle to a whole new level. The weeks leading up to the next hearing felt like living inside a pressure cooker. What had once been a quiet suburban street had turned into a battlefield where every glance, every whisper, and every action carried weight. The HOA board, humiliated by their public failure in court, shifted into survival mode. They weren't just fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to salvage their image, to claw back even a shred of authority from the wreckage I had created. Their first tactic was a smear campaign. Flyers began appearing on doorsteps, written in the same passive-aggressive tone as their letters, but now aimed at the entire neighborhood. They accused me of exploiting media attention for personal gain, of jeopardizing property values, and even of putting children at risk with my rooftop stunt. The language was melodramatic, almost hysterical, as though my truck had transformed from a vehicle into some kind of ticking bomb. But the community wasn't buying it. If anything, the flyers only fueled more gossip and more mockery. Some neighbors brought them straight to me, laughing as they handed them over, saying they couldn't believe the board was wasting money on printing nonsense. Online, photos of the flyers went viral, with people across the country ridiculing the HOA for their paranoia. When the smear campaign failed, the board escalated. One night, I discovered fresh scratches along the side of my truck, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. It was too precise, too targeted to be random. Someone had crept onto my property under cover of darkness, hoping to damage not just my vehicle, but the symbol of my rebellion. I reported it to the police, but I knew nothing would come of it. Without cameras, without proof, it was just another act of cowardice that would go unpunished. Still, the damage lit a fire inside me. They thought they could scare me into submission, but all they had done was prove just how desperate they had become. The board also began targeting anyone who dared show support for me. A neighbor down the street who waved at me one morning found herself cited for excessive holiday decorations, even though it was nothing more than a string of lights. Another, who had spoken kindly about me to a reporter, suddenly received fines for unauthorized landscaping. It was a witch hunt, designed to isolate me by making others pay the price for their loyalty. But the intimidation backfired. Instead of shrinking away, more neighbors began to speak up, quietly at first, then louder. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into conversations, and conversations into outright complaints. The HOA wasn't just targeting me anymore. They were targeting the entire community. And the more they lashed out, the more obvious it became that this wasn't about safety or standards. It was about power. Meanwhile, online, the saga continued to grow. Commentators dissected every new development, spinning theories about what the HOA would try next. Memes showed the board members as cartoon villains, clutching clipboards like weapons. A petition circulated demanding HOA reform, and thousands of signatures poured in from across the country. The board wanted to control the narrative, but instead, the narrative had swallowed them whole, and yet, even as their reputation crumbled, they refused to stop. Days before the next hearing, I received another letter, this time accusing me of illegally modifying my property without approval. They demanded I submit architectural plans, permits, and a restoration timeline. It was laughable. My lawyer assured me it was nothing but a last-ditch effort to bury me in paperwork, a stall tactic to buy them time. Still, the letter made something clear. The HOA wasn't just fighting me in the courtroom. They were fighting me everywhere, on paper, on the street, in whispers and shadows. The stress was constant, a weight that pressed down on me every time I left my house. Neighbors reported board members driving by slowly, snapping more photos, as if they were gathering ammunition for the next round. Reporters still loitered nearby, hungry for another headline. Every night I lay awake listening for footsteps, half expecting another act of vandalism. But amid the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. The neighborhood, once fractured and silent, started to unify. A group of residents quietly organized a petition of their own, not against me, but against the board. They demanded accountability, transparency, and an end to the harassment. For the first time since the war had started, the board wasn't just fighting me. They were fighting the very people they claimed to represent. As the day of the next hearing drew closer, I realized the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about whether my truck stayed on the roof. This was about whether the HOA itself would survive. And that realization filled me with a strange sense of calm. Because no matter what tricks they tried, no matter how much they schemed, they were unraveling. Their desperation was their weakness, and the whole world was watching them crumble. On the night before the hearing, I stood once again in my driveway, staring up at the truck silhouetted against the streetlight. It had started as a stunt, a way to mock their obsession. But now, it was something far greater. It was the rallying point for a community, a symbol for strangers across the country, a monument to the idea that you don't have to bow to bullies just because they wear the mask of authority. The HOA had thrown everything at me: fines, threats, smear campaigns, even sabotage. And yet, the truck remained. Tomorrow, in that courtroom, they would try again. They would argue, they would posture, they would cling to whatever scraps of power they had left. But tomorrow, I would bring everything. The evidence. The subpoena. What? The truth. And when it was over, there would be no going back. Because the final battle wasn't about the truck anymore. It was about who really owned the neighborhood, the people who lived in it, or the board that tried to control it. The morning of the final hearing felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The neighborhood had been stretched thin by months of tension, whispers, and quiet acts of defiance. The HOA had thrown everything at me: threats, fines, smear campaigns, even sabotage. But nothing had broken me. And now, everything came down to this. The courthouse was packed tighter than ever before. Reporters lined the steps, their cameras trained on the entrance as though they were waiting for a celebrity scandal. Protesters and supporters crowded together, their voices rising in chants and jeers. Signs bobbed above the crowd. "Down with HOAs! Let the truck stay! Freedom over fines!" Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The board members sat at their table, shoulders rigid, faces tight. Their lawyer shuffled papers nervously, his once polished confidence now dulled by weeks of relentless ridicule. On my side, my attorney exuded calm, her files neatly arranged, her expression unreadable but steady. Behind us, the gallery overflowed. Neighbors, journalists, curious onlookers, all waiting for the final act of the saga. The judge entered, bringing the room to silence. Her gavel struck, sharp and commanding, as she announced the continuation of the case. The HOA's lawyer went first, trying to salvage what little ground they had left. He argued that the truck was a hazard, that it violated codes, that it disrupted the peace of the neighborhood. His words were smooth, but his voice betrayed the desperation underneath. He tried to paint me as selfish, reckless, a man who valued attention over safety. He leaned heavily on fear of accidents, fear of declining property values, fear of chaos if I were allowed to win. When he finished, the board president rose to speak. His voice shook as he talked about community standards and protecting families. But every word felt hollow, rehearsed, disconnected from the reality everyone in the room had seen play out over the past months. He wasn't defending safety. He was defending power. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood, calm and deliberate, and laid out our case piece by piece. She presented the structural engineer's report again, proving beyond doubt that the truck platform was safe, secure, and reinforced well beyond normal standards. She held up photographs of the vandalism, the flyers, the harassment that had spilled into the lives of my neighbors. She highlighted the stack of fines, a mountain of paper that showed the board's obsession with punishing me at all costs. Finally, she turned to the larger picture. She spoke not just of me, but of every homeowner who had ever been bullied into silence by those who were supposed to represent them. She argued that this wasn't about a truck. It was about abuse of power, about an HOA that had crossed the line from enforcing rules to waging personal vendettas. The courtroom was silent as she spoke, every word hitting like a hammer. When she finished, the judge leaned back in her chair, her eyes scanning the room. She took a long pause, the kind that makes the air feel heavy, before finally speaking. She began with the facts. The structural reports were clear. The truck was secure. The HOA's claims of imminent danger had no foundation. The fines, while technically allowed under the bylaws, had been issued in a manner that appeared excessive, targeted, and retaliatory. The smear tactics, the intimidation of neighbors, while outside the strict scope of the hearing, were impossible to ignore. And then came the ruling. The judge declared that the HOA's attempts to force me to remove the truck had no legal standing. The fines related to the vehicle were to be voided, and any further attempts to penalize me for it would be considered harassment. Moreover, she ordered an independent audit of the HOA board's conduct, citing serious concerns about abuse of authority. The gavel came down, sharp and final. For a moment, the room was still. Then, a ripple of reaction spread through the gallery, gasps, whispers, even a few cheers quickly hushed by the bailiff. The board members sat frozen, their faces pale, their empire of control collapsing in real time. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted. Reporters swarmed, cameras rolled, and strangers cheered as I stepped onto the steps. I wasn't just the guy with the truck on his roof anymore. I was the man who had beaten the HOA at their own game. Back in the neighborhood, the ripple effects were immediate. The board president resigned within a week, citing health reasons. 2 other members quietly stepped down soon after. The petition from residents gained traction, leading to a community vote that replaced much of the board with people who actually lived up to the word neighbor. The atmosphere shifted almost overnight. No more lurking clipboards, no more endless fines. And through it all, the truck remained on the roof. It wasn't just a vehicle anymore. It had become a monument, a reminder of what happens when people refuse to be bullied into silence. Neighbors who once whispered now laughed about it openly, proud that their subdivision had made national headlines for something other than conformity. As for me, I stood on my porch one evening, watching the sun set behind the truck, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. The HOA had tried to break me. Instead, they had broken themselves. And in the end, all it took was one old pickup truck, a stubborn homeowner, and the refugee. Sal to bow to people who thought they held all the power. The war was over, and I had won.